Welcome to Last Orders, the Spike podcast all about freedom and the nanny state. In this episode, we discuss just how dreadful the next Labour government will be, the public health plot against large wine glasses, and the sinister rise of Brummiephobia. Hello and welcome back to Last Orders. I'm Tom Slater, editor of Spiked, joined as I am in every single episode by Chris Snowdon from the Institute of Economic Affairs. Hello, Chris.
Hello, Tom. Hello, listeners.
And we're delighted to be joined, returning to the show today, Rob Lyons. Rob is the Science and Technology Director at the Academy of Ideas and a Spiked columnist. Rob, how are you doing today?
I'm good, thank you. And hello to all our listeners.
So we're going to talk a lot about the Labour Party today, as well as some other things. But the reason I thought we'd pick up on this, Chris, is because the day after we recorded the last episode of Last Orders, Keir Starmer came out and made this big announcement on the nanny state. So if anyone was wondering why we didn't cover it, it wasn't because we were choosing to ignore it because we were too depressed or whatever. But he made this intervention where he said he was spoiling for a fight on the nanny state. He was going to embrace the nanny state. He talks a lot about teeth brushing for children, but also about how under the Tories, children have become really fat, really short, their teeth are rotting. You wrote a piece about this for Spikes, kind of fact-checking Keir Starmer to a certain extent, but also looking at where the next Labour government could be going in terms of the nanny state. Do you want to tell us a bit more about that?
Yeah, I mean, if they're just going to focus on kids brushing their teeth, I can live with that. I don't really see that as being nanny state. They want to spend £9 million, which of course is going to be paid for by non-doms, like everything else. If it's not private schools, tax it. VAT on private schools, it's taxing non-doms. But, I mean, £9 million in the great scheme of things is not a lot of money at all. I don't know how many kids are around the country. It's probably about 50p per kid. So I don't think we're talking a very intensive toothbrushing regime. Hopefully it just involves sort of teaching kids how to brush their teeth at some point and reminding them it's a good thing. But alongside this fairly bland policy was a lot of hype and hysteria about the state of British children's health. Some of which obviously was about the state of their teeth. So there's this sort of fact that keeps being knocked around that the biggest cause of childhood hospitalization or hospital admission is having teeth removed. And this sounds quite bad on first glance until you think, well, what actually would you like to be the biggest cause of it, right? Leukemia, right? Gunshot injuries or something. It's the most trivial reason you could possibly go to hospital for. Having a tooth pulled out is not a big deal. A lot of them are baby teeth anyway, which are going to fall out regardless. And the main reason that kids go to hospital to have their teeth taken out, whereas they didn't in my day very often, is that Blair banned dentists from using general anaesthetics. So they have to go to the hospital. And also, dentists these days don't do any NHS work if they can help it. So if they can palm it off to the hospital, then that's what they do. So that's a lot of nonsense. All the statistics show that there's much less tooth decay amongst everybody, but particularly amongst children, than there's ever been before. So, always room for improvement. But the idea that there's some sort of epidemic of childhood tooth decay is false. Then there's the obesity thing, which I won't go into. I mean, regular listeners hopefully know that childhood obesity figures are completely made up. And then there's this new sort of trope that's been going around more and more recently. I think Chris Van Tuliken, friend of the show, mentioned it, and it took off from there. The idea that kids are getting shorter, and this is the fault of, depending on your position, Brexit, austerity, the Tories, malnutrition, ultra-processed foods. You can pretty much pick anything and say, it shows that I was right because kids are getting shorter. Well, are they? There's some figures bandied around a couple of weeks ago, which did seem to show that kids in the last sort of 10 years, on average, their height had decreased by 2 millimeters, which is obviously a very, very small amount anyway, right? And, as various people point out, could very easily be due to demographic change as much as anything, right? Because some races tend to be shorter than others, Chinese, for example. And so it's possible that such a tiny difference could just be due to more babies being born from certain ethnic groups. But actually, as it turns out, if you look at the figures from the UK, we measure every single child. I think we're one of the few countries that do this. We measure and weigh every single child at the age of 5 and the age of 11. And the figures don't show any reduction in height at all over time. They show, in fact, a continued slight increase. So those figures, as far as I can see, it's made up. But it spawned this meme now that kids are stunted, as well as all their teeth falling out and being incredibly fat.
And Rob, what did you make of this? Because I understand we often lament on this podcast that there's often not a lot of pushback when someone announces kind of nanny state policies or indicates a particular preoccupation with regulating people's lifestyles or obsessing over health or whatever. But what do you think Starmer feels like he has to gain by going here? Why pick up this issue? Why try and make it sound like something he wants to have a fight over? What is it about, I suppose, Labour politicians in particular that makes them very keen on this whole sort of area of policy?
Well, I suppose it's because they think that they want, playing to their base, as it were, that the state is good and the state getting involved in our lives more and more from cradle to grave is generally a good thing. As Chris said, though, giving kids health interventions in schools, I had that when I was a kid, and for the most part, it seems good. In fact, if they were going to do anything, if they were going to dish out MMR vaccinations in schools, that would be a really good thing to try and up the vaccination rates. But brushing teeth or doing eye tests, I got my first pair of glasses because of a school eye test. So that's fine. The whole point about the nanny state is not intervening on children's health. It's making creating restrictions on adults' choices that I think I think you two too as well have a big problem with. So that's, but it's just nonsense. I had a look at the height figures as well, and actually, even when you look at the most deprived kids versus the least deprived kids, the average height difference is about 0.5 centimetre or something. It really isn't anything to write home about. So the idea that increasing poverty could have a massive difference on children's heights just doesn't really make any sense anyway. The vast majority of people in this country get plenty to eat and therefore grow normally and are doing better than they did, in my age group in terms of height. I spend most of my time looking up at people who are younger than me, and I think that's because they're growing taller than they used to in the past. So I think there's a lot of noise in this, and I think it's very much about playing to that base, and also a bit looking oppositional. It's like at least they can kind of claim there's a demarcation between the Tories, who are supposed to be anti-nanny state, even though they're very clearly not, and the Labour Party is going to embrace it.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting. I know you didn't want to go into the childhood obesity figures, Chris, but it's one of those things, as with the idea that all kids are sort of midgets now, or their teeth are rotting out their mouths all the time. It's kind of expecting you to ignore the evidence of your own eyes. Like, you don't even need to have children to just see, if there's like a load of them going on a school trip with those kind of high vises that they're expected to wear these days. The idea that a quarter of them or a bit less than a quarter of them are supposed to be obese or whatever, it's just not.
37%.
37%, I didn't realise it was that.
Is the figure that the BBC was bandying around. Should be the figure from. I think that probably does include what they call overweight. With children, there is literally no difference in overweight and obesity. Neither of them really mean anything when it comes to kids because of the way they measure it. But yeah, 37%. The BBC did this article this week saying the pandemic could affect people's health for 80 years to come, because it's true that the threshold for obesity, which is not actually obesity, but it is a threshold of weight and height, right? BMI. It went up a lot during the pandemic, which I think tells you something about how kids put on weight in the first place, which is not going out and exercising, perhaps. That did go up, and amongst the 5-year-olds, it came back down to where it was before. And with the 11-year-olds, it didn't. It came down a bit. But it's 37. In London, it's like more than 40%. How can anyone believe this? How can whether you call it overweight or obese, these are visible conditions. And just look around you. If you've got kids, you pick them up from the school gates, look and see how many of them are fat. It's the same as it ever was, as far as I can see, which is 1 per class.
Yeah, no, completely. And it's like as if, all school sports would kind of ground to a halt. There'd be some sort of crisis in these different areas if it was actually as bad as they were saying. But Rob, a lot of people have been comparing Keir Starmer to like Blair. There's a lot of talk about this being a kind of a return to that kind of politics. Some people mean that in a derogatory fashion. Some people mean that in a praiseworthy fashion, unfortunately. But is this something which is the nanny state as we know it very much kind of New Labour legacy? Or is it something that has a bit of a longer tail, do you think? Because it does feel like, especially when there does seem something reminiscent of that era now with the current Labour Party, which is to say, we're not going to do very much on the economy. We're going to stick more or less to the kind of fiscal rules that have been laid down for us. We don't want to frighten the horses, but what we can do is meddle in your lifestyles. Putting to one side the children aspect of it, they obviously have announced a particular interest in this area. Is this a very kind of new Labour thing to be preoccupied with the politics of lifestyles, we used to call it?
It is, but it's also something that started a bit before New Labour. So some people will point to the Health of the Nation report, which I think was 1990, under the Tory government then, about more intervention in lifestyles and about setting targets for things and whatnot. And obviously New Labour picked that up and ran with it much more. And we know I know living in Scotland that whenever a government can't do anything useful, it will turn to these lifestyle things to show that they're doing something. And obviously the SNP do that in spades. And I think that Keir Starmer, as is, well, we'll go on, I'm sure, to talk about the Labour government more generally, what it might mean. But they're having to row back on us so much that this kind of thing is something that they at least feel that they can deliver. Toothbrushing in schools, probably. And they can deliver a 9 p.m. watershed for junk food adverts, even though lots of people have talked about it before. They can deliver that. They can't deliver necessarily economic growth. They certainly can't deliver extra spending on own green initiatives, which they keep sort of shrinking that sort of proposal. So it is something that they can do, and I think that they are thrashing around for things that they can deliver on. So it's, even by the standards of Blair, is actually a very diminished idea of what can be achieved by government.
The rot set in my opinion, with the Liberal government of 1906, banning opium, and also to some extent when they took the cocaine out of Coca-Cola, which I think was
the Rubicon was crossed
years earlier. People thought it was a good idea to take the cocaine out of Coca-Cola, but it's a slippery slope. It's like goal line technology. It seems like a good idea, and then suddenly it's causing immeasurable suffering. That Liberal government in 1906 has a lot to answer for.
We should go further. Go back to saying that factories can't employ children anymore and forcing them to go to school. I think that's when the slippery slope started.
Yeah, and then you end up you have to be in school till you're 18. People don't want to be. They don't want to be in school. They want to be in a factory,
learning maths,
earning a living.
Should we talk a bit more about Keir Starmer's Labour and where it's going? As you were suggesting there, Rob, another big part of at least the debate about what this government might look like has been around green politics, because you're getting a lot of mixed signals. Obviously, they want to, as every government regressively wants to these days, be seen as a sort of world leader, a trailblazer in the green transition, in the rush to net zero. But on the one hand, they do have this 28 billion investment, annual investment they pledge, which they've now kind of completely rode back on. They've said that they'll do it, but within their fiscal rules, which seems to be another way of saying they're not going to do it at all. But at the same time, they still seem very attached to this mad idea, Chris, that they're going to decarbonise energy by 2030. So that in the space of a couple of years, 6 years, essentially, if we have an election in relatively short order, that all of it's just going to go. It's just going to be nuclear, it's going to be wind, it's going to be solar, there'll be a bit of gas, but we'll, suck that carbon out of the air from somewhere else. What do you make of that pledge? Because it's the one thing that Starmer really doesn't want to be seen to be bending on. He'll be very defensive when kind of called out on it. So what do you make of that? Do you think he really thinks he's going to manage that?
I'd be more worried if he really believes it, because it's literally impossible. I'm not being some sort of pooh-bah or Eeyore. It is impossible to do because we don't have the baseload at all. Sometimes the wind power can create half the energy in the country, and that's fantastic. But a lot of the times, a day later, it can be 0%. Solar hardly contributes anything, obviously, especially this time of year. We've got a bit of biomass, which is a scam anyway, and we've got a declining amount of nuclear. So where's the electricity going to come from? It doesn't matter how many wind turbines you build, you're not going to get there. The only way to do it would be to have a huge investment in nuclear, and 6 years is nowhere near enough. The Tories' target of 2035 doesn't give them enough time either, by the way. It's just a weird thing to promise when he must know it's not doable. And when Boris Johnson said, we'll do net zero by 2050, at least he knew he wouldn't be around when that target wasn't achieved. Whereas Starmer will probably be fighting an election that year. I just don't get why he would make a promise that he's bound to come nowhere near delivering, and he will probably be around and very likely Prime Minister when he fails to deliver it.
For example, we just heard that the one nuclear power station that we're building now won't go live at the very earliest until 2031, so a year after his pledge. In the meantime, we're closing 4 or 5. So that means that nuclear is going to be a much smaller percentage of what we're doing anyway. And remember, this is all electricity. Electricity is only about a fifth of the energy that we use. Most of it is, oil for transport and gas for heating and coal for smelting steel. All that is going out the window as well. Even that, just doing electricity is impossible. And it's still nothing compared to all of the other energy that we've got to replace. And they want us all to have heat pumps from now on as well. And they want us all to be driving electric cars, which means even more.
All of which means you need more.
Yeah. So it's a moving target that's going further away from them, just at the point where their ability to deliver on it is getting weaker and weaker. So yes, it is nonsense. It's playing to some sort of base, and then they'll make up some excuse about why they can't do it. And then we have Great British Energy, which is not only going to be all renewable, state-owned, because that's always been a success story, but it's going to save families that the claim is £1,400 a year, when the energy price cap from April is going to be £1,600 a year. That's what they're going to be. People are going to pay £200 a year for electricity. It's just nonsense. It's just, the whole thing is absolute garbage.
You do get the sense that politicians are increasingly retreating into a sort of fantasy world, don't you? It's all about targets without really any policies. It's it's going to be a smoke-free generation. Like 2030, there's going to be no carbon in the grid by 2030. We're going to halve child abuse by 2030. That's a target that's been quietly forgotten about. It's just like, these are things I would like to do. This is how I would like the country to be. But that's not governing. That's just fantasizing. It's just dreaming. There's nothing to it. And I think one of the reasons the Tories are doing so badly in the polls is that they've made up so many stupid promises over the years and have failed to deliver, not just on the promises, but on the basic stuff of governing, of just keeping the things that they do actually have some control over: the NHS, schools, police, the army, all these things are falling apart. These people are incapable of doing the stuff that we want them to do, and partly because they're so keen on going on about trying to change things they can't, like the climate.
Yeah, the weather. I saw someone liken Labour's economic approach or approach to all these issues to like a sort of rain dance. Like they just think that if Rachel Reeves shows up at Davos and makes the right kind of noises and doesn't look like a Corbynista, that all of this private sector investment will just flow in instantly and everything will be transformed in the space of about 5 or 6 years. Like she almost has to do nothing apart from seem really boring and middle of the road.
Do you see the thing? It more or less covered it on a recent episode. Rachel Reeves apparently said that the price of the weekly shop had gone up by more than £100 in the last 2 years because of inflation and the Tories and all this. And that obviously doesn't sound right? Because that's actually more than the average week. The average weekly shop is about £75. And she said it'd gone up by about £105. And it turns out that she got confused. This is somebody who apparently used to work at the Bank of England, right? She went on the ONS website, and the ONS talk about a basket of goods, by which they mean everything you spend your money on, including rent and stuff like that, right? Literally everything you spend your money. And she thought that meant a shopping basket. And then that in the press release got turned into your weekly shop. And it turns out like your overall expenditure has gone up £100 a week, but average wages have also gone up £100 a week, which is quite a relevant point to make. But it led to this ridiculous situation in which the Labour Party claims that people were spending an extra £100 a week in Tesco's, which, apart from anything else, shows how completely out of touch they must be to even read that and go, well, that sounds right. That you know.
That's incredible. What is the Bank of England doing? Because there's so many of their alumni are terribly unimpressive. Matt Hancock was a Bank of England economist, wasn't he?
Was he an economist?
Yeah, I think so. Why? I don't know. Yeah. But it's the story of our times, I suppose.
They're not sending
They're not sending their best. Should we talk about wine glasses?
Yes, please.
Chris, this is a story that you've covered about a particular public health professor who seems to be really preoccupied with the size of wine glasses or the size of servings in general, and whether or not manipulating them will make everyone stop drinking or stop eating as much. Do you want to tell us a bit about this this individual's work and what they've been saying recently?
Yes, this is a labour of love by the esteemed public health academic Professor Dame Theresa Marteau, who was also seconded to SAGE during the pandemic. This gives you an idea of the kind of people who are on SAGE. She's made it more or less a life's work to see whether changing or restricting, really, the size of wine glasses and or wine servings has an effect on how much people drink. She's done many, many studies looking specifically at the wine glass issue. So she's at Cambridge University, so she basically goes around bars and finds one that will, for a week or two, get rid of their largest wine glass, and see if it changes how much people drink. And it doesn't really, or it might do maybe in restaurants, but not in bars. The evidence is sadly inconclusive in this vital area of health research. So she's since moved on to looking at servings themselves. So she gets pubs to remove their largest serving, which is usually 250 mils, but sometimes 175 mils. And she published a study which was covered rapturously by the BBC, amongst others, because apparently it showed that overall people drank 7% less wine. In actual fact, she had 20 bars involved in this, and in 9 of them, the amount of wine actually increased. So it was hardly the most compelling data anyway. But on average, apparently there's a 7% reduction. And she said this could have important public health implications, and local councils should look at banning pubs from serving wine in above a certain measures. In actual fact, the reduction in alcohol was 4 to 5 units, which would be a decent amount if it was per person, but it's actually per pub, which really doesn't seem like it's going to have a very big effect on liver cirrhosis rates in this country, particularly since most wine, overwhelmingly, in fact, is drunk at home. And I don't know if there's that many alcoholics buying wine in pubs. So maybe she should move on to more productive areas, dare I say? I don't know. I don't think she will, though. I think this is a whole new area for her. She's also looked at the effect of reducing plate sizes in a kind of Alan Partridge way. And I think the evidence also was inconclusive. But yeah, this is, by the way, a £3.1 million project, funded not by the taxpayer on this occasion, thank God, but by the Wellcome Trust. I'm really in the wrong.
Rob, what do you make of all this?
Well, yeah, I mean, as Chris was saying, I mean, if reducing the size of the container worked, then you wouldn't see people at the Pizza Hut salad bar making those Close Encounters of the Third Kind piles up to try and get their money's worth. It doesn't work. It's whenever they do an intervention like this, people just change their behaviour over time. So, like, one of the things with this wine glass study was that people went, oh, well, we'll just get the bottle then. So they just end up drinking as much, if not more, anyway. It all depends on people's behaviour, and people respond in different ways that can't be controlled by such a simplistic intervention as changing the container size. And people generally want to spend X amount of time in the pub because they're having a good time, they're having a good chat, and they'll keep drinking, or they want to get inebriated to a certain degree and then stop because they've got work in the morning or whatever. And serving sizes and other such clunky interventions really don't make much difference to people's behaviour.
And there's also unintended consequences. I mean, you mentioned one there, people just buy the bottle. But it's now genuinely quite difficult to just buy a single Mars bar in a lot of places. My local football club, for example, you ask for a Mars bar, they give you the double one, right? Because they've shrunk Mars bars so much that it's not enough for people. So they end up consuming a lot more. It's the same with crisps. Hell of a lot of places now only sell the grab bag, so-called grab bag of crisps, the sharing sizes. So it's really not been very effective, even if in its narrow aim. And with tobacco, of course, they go completely the other way. With tobacco, you ban the small sizes for some reason. So you can't buy a pack of 10 anymore. You can't buy a pouch of rolling tobacco. You have to buy more of it. The theory being, well, that makes it more expensive. But of course, by the same token as this wine glass research, it gives you more to smoke and you'll smoke more. which is it?
It's absolutely crazy. And another story that's absolutely crazy, Rob, is a story out of Aberystwyth in Wales, which you wrote about for Spiked this past week. Very, very amusing. There's often, I think people are realising now that the whole policing of hate crime has gotten far beyond what we thought it was. Even if you sort of part the whole debate about what is hate crime, what are the boundaries of it, I don't think people would think that this would qualify. But essentially, there was a sort of neighbourhood dispute, and someone left a sort of abusive message aimed at a Brummie neighbour, which I'll read out just so people can see how horrible it is. So they accused him of being a lowlife and demanded that they take their clapped-out crappy boats, jeeps, cars, and your vomit-inducing accents back to Brummieland, and please take a few thousand other yours with you. Which, as you pointed out, is a bit confusing because obviously yams is the phrase, but also that refers to people from the black country, doesn't it? So they're really, if they haven't really done enough research to express their own prejudices, it seems like in this particular instance. But this is being treated by Aberystwyth police as a hate crime and being investigated as such. Do you want to tell us a bit more about it?
Yes. Well, so as you say, it sounds like one individual who has, for some reason, developed a prejudice against Brummies. It's not even against all outsiders. I could almost understand that if all the people buying second homes in Aberystwyth or as holiday homes, or all the people using them as Airbnbs, and there's a bit of backlash against that. So the Telegraph had an article trying to sort of explain why this might be, but to single out Brummies is particularly odd, especially as I think the guy in question was born in Wales and was moved back to the mother country. So it's really bizarre, and it's just petty prejudice. And that's always been there, always will be there. People have petty prejudices about all sorts of things, and it does not require the intervention of the state saying this is a particularly nasty piece of petty prejudice, so we're going to call it a hate incident. And it does actually call into question, or just illustrate just how ludicrous the idea of a hate crime is. If somebody commits an assault or threatens somebody because of some characteristic like the colour of their skin or their sexual orientation or religion, I think we probably think that is a bit worse than doing those things because you're drunk in the pub and you think somebody's looking at your girlfriend or something. So that's it. But that you just deal with that in the sentencing. You don't need to create a special crime for that kind of thing. And it's just a kind of virtue signal saying we're doing something about these things just at the time when those things are all in decline, pretty much, that we are doing something specific about these things, which is completely unnecessary and ends up with these ludicrous consequences of calling somebody who's from 90 miles away from where you live, calling them mean names, and that is a hate incident. That is just ludicrous. I hope, as I say in the article, I hope it just really makes people question the whole notion of hate crimes.
Do you face much discrimination up in Scotland, Rob?
Well, no. I mean, I used to work, when I first moved to Edinburgh, I used to work in various chains of builders merchants like Jewson's and whatever, and the language and the banter is colourful in those places because you're talking about horny-handed working men. The worst thing I ever got called was when I came out of the admin office and one of the joiners who popped into the sales part said, "Who's this four-eyed Benny Hill English? See you next Tuesday." which was both alarming and funny. But he looked like Lurch from the Addams Family as well. So he was quite scary. Most 95%, 99% of that kind of thing is just banter, or at most half joking, and never really bothered me at all. I know some people may get bothered by it, but I don't. And it's just, you're not from round here kind of stuff. I don't very rarely have come across something that I think, well, actually, this is Scottish people being mean to English people. I'm sure that does go on, but I haven't experienced it. And I've certainly never experienced Brummiephobia personally.
Adrian Charles, I think, has spoken out about Brummiephobia. He used to be on the, what was it called, that money program? Working Lunch. Do you remember that? Yeah, we're talking back in the 90s. And he said he wasn't taken seriously as a sort of financial journalist because he has quite a strong West Brom accent. I think that's probably true. I think probably Brummies get discriminated against more on the basis of their accent than most people. Doesn't it keep coming up like in bottom in the sort of most trusted or most respected accent surveys?
Yeah, I think there is a attitude that Brummies are, because of the sort of industrial past, that we are somehow a bit gauche and Philistine and a bit thick, but that's about as far as it goes, and it doesn't really bear any analysis. And I'm sure that doesn't really make much difference to people. I mean, I think Adrian Charles might think, I've got a West Brom accent, therefore I'm not obviously from Oxbridge, and therefore I don't, in those kind of business economy circles, maybe my face doesn't fit.
But you don't get many Brummie accents on the media, do you, when you think about it?
Bit of a trailblazer there, Adrian Charles.
Yeah, in many ways. He's also gone on to completely deconstruct the art of writing newspaper columns.
Well, this is it. I had no idea that he was. I thought he was a kind of performance artist by this point.
That's what he is, isn't he? I mean, the whole thing is
off every week.
Dada experiment. He's changed the whole art of the column writing. He's made every other columnist redundant. And when if you're a Guardian columnist, you must despair at having to compete with Charles. There were a couple of articles last week in the Guardian on the same day about super yachts. One of them was by, I can't remember the guy's name, but he's one of the particularly dour, columnists, and he was moaning on about how super yachts, everything that's wrong with the world, and plutocrats and pumping out lots of emissions and all that. And then Charles happened to also write about super yachts, and it was just along the lines of, they're too expensive. I'd hate to have a super yacht. They cost so much to maintain.
That's incredible. But as you say, Rob, it's if you're going to just sort of, where do you draw the line with this hate crime things? Because if it is essentially, it's if it was some sort of xenophobic hatred or whatever, how does being anti-English or anti-Welsh, how are you going to differentiate between those two things? And this isn't the first time I think that the police have got involved in this. Wasn't there that case a few years ago where Rod Liddell wrote some column about the Welsh, about taking the mick out of the language or whatever, and like a Wales police chief reported him to like one of the press regulators. And you just think, what the hell is going on? But times we live in, unfortunately.
I mean, if it was, as the Welsh nationalists have done in the past, who say, if you don't leave, we're going to burn your home, then
that's a hate crime.
That's bad. I would say objectively that is a bad thing. But just saying I don't like your accent and your crap car is, I think that's just that's a matter of taste, I have to say.
And we used to be able to negotiate that, like, as you say, threatening violence, sheep shagging joke.
Yeah,
not the same thing.
Slippery slope again.
I want to squeeze in one postbag question before I let you guys get on with your day.
Postbag.
It's bulging, eh?
This one's from Disco Citizens, which I'm sure is a real name, and asking, what is your favourite Weatherspoons and why? This is obviously a topic that we got into last week, Chris. Do you want to kick us off on this one? Do you have a favourite Weatherspoons or a couple of favourite Weatherspoons, and why is that?
I like the one in Baker Street. Tim Martin is particularly keen on that one. Nice. Well, they're all so big, aren't they, mostly? Nice location, nice building. Any of them really in London. There's a good one in Camden I enjoy. In London, you just get a bigger contrast between what people normally pay and what you pay in Wetherspoons. I mean, you get the contrast literally anywhere in the country, but it's particularly pronounced in London because pints are now £7 or more, unbelievably. And there is nothing like going from a pub where you're paying £7 to go in, where you're getting a pint of Ruddles for £1.49, £1.99. You still get the £2 pints in London. So, my answer, I haven't got one where I live, unfortunately. Otherwise, I guess I would probably say that one. But yeah, any in London, if you want me to be specific, Baker Street.
Brilliant. Rob?
Well, it would have to be the Sir John Oldcastle in Farringdon, because it used to be, when Spiked was based in Farringdon, it used to be the Spiked drinking den for many a year. And then they screwed it up because those of you listening may remember that Wetherspoons decided to introduce a smoking ban about a year before it actually became a legal smoking ban. And they did it at the Sir John Oldcastle, and on the first day, the bar had newspapers and fruit laid out instead. And we're like, you've misjudged your audience on this one. And so we started drinking round the corner at another boozer. So where everybody, because Spiked and the Academy of Ideas was shared the same building, had a disproportionate number of smokers, and therefore smoking was essential de rigueur for any Friday night drinking session, which is a shame. But I still have fond memories of the John Oldcastle, and I occasionally revisit it when I'm in London.
Yeah, he picked the wrong pub there, didn't he? He's not perfect in Martin. We mentioned this a couple of weeks ago.
They can't be perfect, unfortunately. But brilliant. Rob, Chris, thanks so much for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You've been listening to Last Orders. Be sure to subscribe to this podcast wherever you get your podcasts. Please do take a moment to leave us a rating and a review. And if you'd like to support the show, why not become a Spiked supporter? Just go to spiked-online.com/supporters to sign up. That's spiked-online.com/supporters.